We've got Piers Corbyn with us because he's telling us about the science and the means by which climate change is being manipulated by the powers that be for all sorts of different reasons. But I asked you just before the news, Piers, about the science, because the science kind of is always what the people who tell us the climate is changing fast fall back on and say, well, all the science is on one side, but you're saying it isn't.
No, certainly not. If you look at the data shows that when you analyse temperatures and carbon dioxide, that carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures. So after the last ice age, for example, Antarctic temperatures, and you measure these by ice cores, went up, and then about 800 years later, the amount of carbon dioxide in the world went up. And the reason for the warming now, the reason for the extra CO2 now is a delayed effect from the medieval warm period. In the medieval warm period, extra CO2, which was emitted from the upper levels of the oceans, got subsumed by extra cold water from melt in Greenland going under the sea. So that cold water, which absorbs more CO2 than warm water, gobbled up extra CO2, that then circulates under the Atlantic, under the Pacific, and comes out again about 600 to 800 years later and emits its CO2. So that's why we have larger CO2 now. Man will have no effect on this CO2. And if man was really worried about CO2, if the powers that be were honestly worried, they should address the fact that termites produce 10 times more CO2 than man. Man is only 4% of the total amount of CO2 produced, and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is only 0.04%. So man is 4% of 0.04% of the atmosphere.
And presumably...
which is a trivial amount, but the point is that if man's CO2 is important, then the rest of nature has to obey man. So the termites have to obey man and produce more CO2 when the termites do. I mean, it's a conspiracy of nature. That's what they're telling you to believe in. It's a completely insane conspiracy of nature.
And presumably
there's no evidence for it whatsoever. And presumably, there's only evidence against.
And presumably the minuscule makeup of this country in terms of the man-made CO2 in that 4% is even less, right?
It's, dare I say, like pissing in the wind. I hope I don't get arrested for that.
No, you don't get arrested for that.
Okay.
But let's talk to let's get a call up, because Laura is calling in from London, wants to ask you a question. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning. Thank you for this interesting interview. So brilliant. Piers, I've got a couple of questions. One is what you think of chemtrails, because I've looked at it online and seen the court hearings about the thing, so it does actually exist as far as I know. The other thing is, I believe in what the ancient Zoroastrians believe in, which is not to pollute the air, water or soil, because you have to breathe the air, you have to drink the water, and you have to eat whatever's grown in the soil. So it would be foolish to pollute. In that case, if the agencies and powers that be are going on about zero, energy and all the rest of it, how come they are increasing the manufacture, sales and dropping of bombs?
Well,
which is a polluter of air, water and soil, and a killer of mankind.
Yeah, totally right. Well, in terms of weather control and, that sort of stuff, chemtrails, those are real and dangerous and bad. And I think they're experimental at the moment for military purposes. They're not very effective yet, but there should be a proper parliamentary inquiry into them. There was a parliamentary committee, but it seemed to have had its purposes curtailed and not done.
But when you say they are real, I mean, people point up to the sky and see trails from aeroplanes and call them chemtrails.
No.
That's not what we're talking about, right? Because we don't want to get into the land of the tinfoil hat.
No. There are things which are being done experimentally, and there are conferences on geoengineering, and things are dropped into the sky on occasions. And for example, the floods in 1953 at Lynmouth were caused by attempts to make it rain, which worked. Namely, you can drop solid carbon dioxide granules or silver iodide into clouds, and it makes them rain. Now, that is quite a simple thing. The chemtrails may be other things, and exactly what is going on, I don't know. But it's not... There's a lot of real real trails go on from aeroplanes, which are not chemtrails, and one has to be careful to avoid confusion.
Sure. Laura, did you have another question?
Yeah, the thing about the I know that the powers that be don't believe in what they've got another agenda, because if they were being authentic, they would have said, oh, we're very concerned about polluting and so on and so forth. We're going to stop manufacturing, selling and dropping bombs all over the place.
That's the same as the last question, though, Laura. Listen, thanks very much for calling. And we've had an answer to that. Let's go to James, who's in Bath. James, very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah, what do you want to say, James?
Yeah, I just want to say, very interesting debate, and about the recent floods and climate change. It's always very convenient that they blame it on climate change, but if you actually look at all the floods in the last 10, 15 years, the one thing they've all got in common is house building. You know, I've got nothing against house building, but it's in the wrong areas. They're linking up, you know, towns and villages and so on and so forth. And when concrete goes down, there's nowhere for the rain to go. So, of course, the existing waterways, the ditches, the rivers, you know, they cannot cope with the additional runoff. It's quite a straightforward process. It's not rocket science, but no one ever mentions on the TV or the radio, oh, it's house building. Oh, it's climate change. Let's blame it on climate change. It's very convenient to blame it on climate change. But, yeah, hey, look, the weather might be changing. But the fact is that they're building houses everywhere, which I'm not against, by the way, but they're not going in the right areas. And unfortunately, it's overloading the system. You know, the system can't cope. It's like everything, isn't it? You know, more people come in, the hospitals overflow, the roads are overflowing, more houses are being built, which, like I say, I'm not against, but it overflows the existing water channels and it can't cope. It's, you know, and it's just unfortunate that it's always blamed on climate change.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Of course, some of the houses being built are kept empty to make profits in London through speculation, and I'm against building of those. But of course, we do have to build houses for people or use empty ones. I think what you say about the bad planning of housing is excellent. It's also worth pointing out, though, that as we move more into the Little Ice Age and generally colder weather, you will get more extreme deluges and more hailstorms. And we predicted this 5 years ago at a big conference in Geneva, and it is now coming true. Because some of these deluges are more severe than they have been, say, 20 years ago.
They certainly are. I mean, funnily enough, as we speak, there's an amber weather warning going out about rainfall, very heavy rainfall today. And I can tell you, I mean, just from my own personal experience of flooding, people generally think that flooding is caused by warmer weather rather than colder weather, but you're saying it's the reverse.
Yeah, no. In the Little Ice Age, there were massive floods in the during the Napoleonic Wars and during the 1700s. Right. Absolutely.
Actually, one of the questions that comes up a lot, which people ask me, which of course, not being a scientist, I can't answer, but people always say to me, how is it that the last ice age ended? Because nobody was driving around in Land Rovers back then. And, you know, obviously, you know, Prince Harry wasn't around to save the planet or to change the temperature. So, you know, or Barefoot Harry, as we now call him. How is it possible that the ice melted without any kind of global warming scenario?
Look, the natural state of the world in the last million years has been ice ages, i.e. most of the, northern hemisphere, or a large part, most of Russia and Scotland, etc., covered in ice. And these, every 100 to 130,000 years, these ice caps melt, and we get into what we call now an interglacial period, which is warmer. Now, this happens nothing to do with CO2. It happens because of the change in tilt of the Earth and the change in direction of the Earth's magnetic poles, because that changes the interaction with the sun, which is magnetically connected to the Earth. And as we are now, during the interglacials, we get more particles coming from the sun, which do various things, but affect the jet stream, for example. And the general effect is to make the world a warmer place. And right now, this interglacial is almost ended, i.e. it's lasted about 10,000 years. And the last 500 or 700 years have been colder than all the previous part of the last 10,000 years. So we're getting colder anyway. And the blips up and down now are part of shorter cycles. And we are now in, according to satellite measurements, a declining phase. And the next solar active period is going to be very inactive, and that's why we're entering a little ice age.
Okay, well, I guess but buy a few more sweaters for the winter then. Is that
Well,
your
you might
suggestion?
need more than that. And, it means we'll
Don't worry,
have,
I've got a very big coat, which some people have seen.
grain production will start failing. Already parts of North America aren't able to produce the grain they could. On the maize growing in southern parts of the USA is shrinking because of too many floods and hailstorms and so forth.
Right. It's been a fascinating 40 minutes or so, Piers. Thank you so much for coming in. The people have spoken. The people have asked some good questions. We can never get enough questions on, I'm afraid.
We
but
need action for life rather than
Okay.
Extinction Rebellion, I was going to say.
action for life.
Can I give you some good points?
Please
Four-
do.
Four closing points.
Yeah.
First of all, just about Prince Harry, I would say that the idea that he's worried about his children suffering from anything in the future is ridiculous. And I think instead of this nonsense, we want action for life.
Right.
And we want to think against all these false narratives coming to us. We have to oppose the self-hating policies which are mentally disturbing children. And we should totally oppose the World Economic Forum policy for theft of your rights and property and income and living standards.